The pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus once said, "The soul is undiscovered, though explored forever, to a depth beyond report." I've always been curious about the soul. I can't articulate a single reason for this, other than it is one of those words bursting with meaning, one that contains a mystery perhaps even greater than God. God is a mystery, no doubt, but one beyond any one of us, maybe even beyond our world. But the soul, that is the unknown self, a being within ourselves, unknown to even ourselves. That is the greatest mystery. Still, as an otherworldly being housed somewhere inside us, perhaps making decisions as if from below, or, as it were, unconsciously, I don't believe it's altogether impossible to know this part of us. In fact, I believe this part of us makes itself known through the rhythms and patterns of our lives. I mean those patterns that play out over and over again throughout our lifetime in various ways. Maybe these patterns reveal themselves through a person who's come into our lives, seemingly to act as the catalyst for something that desires to emerge from within us, or through many different persons to be rehashed again and again. Maybe these patterns are brought about by our own decisions or actions, though they may at times seem only loosely correlated, if at all, and our reasoning behind certain decisions is inexplicable, even to ourselves. Or maybe we just can't find any discernible reason why we keep brushing against the same lessons at all. But no matter the various archetypal themes that play out their courses, we all have those particular few that it seems our soul has attached itself to, so that we can't help but to continue experiencing, as if the same archetypal dramas have also buried some great stake in our very being. In my own life, one of the patterns which has been strongest has been to grapple with my divergent beliefs about the transcendent and religion. And in keeping in step with such a theme, sometime in early 2023, I bought a book written by the Jungian analyst Jason E. Smith titled Religious but Not Religious. For whatever reason, I began but never finished it. Perhaps that something operating unconsciously inside me decided it just wasn't time yet. But in the fall of the same year, I picked it up again and read the whole thing in only a couple short days. It changed my perspective about religion profoundly and cemented my reasons for someday becoming a Jungian analyst myself. The book focuses on a talk given by Carl Jung at the 1939 Guild for Pastoral Psychology on something he called the symbolic life. Prior to reading this book, I already had some interest in the concept after hearing about it a year earlier. And although it would be a stretch to even call it a concept of Jung's, since there's only one recorded instance which Jung actually names it directly, traces of the concept, the symbolic life, can be seen reflected throughout his works, though in feeling rather than in words. But the reason I became so interested in the symbolic life was its seeming importance for the soul according to Jung. In this single incident that the symbolic life is named, Jung says, "Now, we have no symbolic life, and we're all badly in need of the symbolic life. Only the symbolic life can express the need of the soul, the daily need of the soul, mind you. And because people have no such thing, they can never step out of this mill, this awful, grinding, banal life in which they are nothing but. Everything is banal. Everything is nothing but. And that is the reason why people are neurotic." When I first read this quote sometime in 2022, I was in my mid-20s and had been working as a legal assistant for the past 3 years. At that time, I was still figuring out what I wanted to go back to school for after I had dropped out of my first degree program in 2018. That degree was in music performance, something I'd spent literally my entire life dreaming of since I discovered my love of singing and performing as a kid. I already came from a very musical family, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents who made a living performing since long before I was even born. So, singing and performing always came really naturally to me. But at 19, I had just moved to a new city on my own and was fully supporting myself while studying, so work became the priority, and my grades inevitably began to slip. By my second year in the program, I was becoming too exhausted to keep going, and the reality that my degree in no way guaranteed me a comfortable life began to sink in a very real way, and it terrified me. So I dropped out and spent my subsequent year working various jobs while barely scraping by each month just so I could have the privilege to live in a tiny bachelor suite in an apartment basement infested by cockroaches. And I mean infested. I would find them on my walls, behind my appliances, in the hallways of my building, and any other nook and cranny that tickled a cockroach's fancy. I learned that if I ran my kettle, which sat right next to the stove, that the heat or steam would lure them from behind it, and in that instant I would try to squash as many as I could. But it didn't matter how many I managed to kill, because they always came back. All I could afford was eggs and toast, so that's all I ate, every day. Every other month, my cell provider threatened to disconnect my service because I was constantly falling behind on my phone bill, and debt collectors of all sorts were always after me to pay whatever bills I was barely keeping up with. At one point, I worked as a server part-time, which I was admittedly pretty terrible at, and I was usually only given the smaller lunch shifts. But I hardly ever got through a whole shift because the restaurant was so painstakingly slow during lunch that more often than not, I would be cut after working less than 3 hours. I made less than $2,000 a month. That's $2,000 lower than the poverty line in my province. So I couldn't even afford to leave the house other than to go for a walk during the 6 months out of the year that the weather permitted it. We have long and harsh winters where I live, so I often stayed inside. Still, a walk wasn't much of a reconnection with nature, since I didn't even live in a nice part of town. Just busy stroads as far as the eye could see, and nestled right next to them were the several unsightly storefronts amidst desolate parking lots, taunting me with all the things I couldn't afford to buy. If going for a walk did anything, it just reminded me of a wallowing sense of vacancy I couldn't escape. I was 22 and fucking miserable. The most miserable I'd ever been in my entire life. I felt so incredibly heartbroken and alone. Everything about my life seemed only to serve as a reminder that it wasn't my right to exist, to know contentment, that I had to earn it. Yet, other people seemed to be just fine doing the same, even though I knew that there were others struggling like me, or even worse than me. But everyone else seemed to have life figured out, or at least they'd done something to earn their right to existence that I hadn't, and were given the apparent privilege of enjoying it. Yes, many of those people, I'm sure, had genuinely worked hard to be where they were. But was I not also working hard myself, and doing so into the ground? And when I did go for walks, peering into restaurant windows as I passed by, I felt completely abandoned by the world, watching those chosen few as they sipped wine and broke bread with their friends. I wondered why I wasn't good enough to do that too. My life continued on this way for some time, and I came no closer to realizing what I wanted to do with my life. I mean, how could I? At that time, I had absolutely no room to experience passion for anything but survival. Then, during one of my shifts at a cafe I was working at, my coworker offhandedly mentioned an old employee who took a 10-month legal assistant program and had left the cafe after she was offered a job out of her practicum. In that moment, a light bulb went off in my head, and after my shift, I immediately went home to research how I could do something similar. Even though I had absolutely zero interest in being a legal assistant as a long-term career option, I'd figured I'd be better off finding a more stable job while I figured out the rest of my life in the meantime. And just like that nameless barista, I completed an associate's degree where I was immediately hired out of my practicum, beginning my short 3-year stint as a legal assistant. And I have to say that during the first couple of years, I was really quite content. For the first time in my adult life, I was experiencing the stability I had never known, but had desperately longed for. Soon, I was living in my dream apartment, a stone's throw away from countless restaurants, shops, cafes, and bars. And in fact, I lived right in the middle of the area that's considered the place to be in my city. Whether it's for a night on the town, a dinner date, a cafe hangout, an evening at the movies, or where most of our biggest festivals take place every year. It was a beautiful area bursting with life and novelty, and it wasn't long before I'd found my stride. Now I was one of those people, sipping wine and breaking bread with my friends on a near weekend basis because I had finally, absolutely, earned my right to embrace and enjoy life. And I did. Still, there was no world in which I wanted to remain a legal assistant forever. And in the back of my mind, I knew this would all come to an end, and I would have to give up everything I had just become accustomed to become a struggling student again. In short, I knew that this feeling wasn't going to last forever. And it didn't. Because when I read those words of Jung's only a few short years later, I had already become disillusioned with my life. Everything I did felt so meaningless. I had transitioned into a general business admin job that offered me a higher wage. But at this point, any work that I did, no matter how much money it gave me, just made me miserable. I hated going into work every day just to give myself over to an organization that didn't care about me and where I didn't even belong to myself. And having to do things that essentially made no tangible effect on the world. Like a cog in the machine, I spent hours of my days entering data from various documents into Excel spreadsheets just to file those same documents away to their final resting place, where they would never be thought of again. Yeah, one could argue that there was some reason for my job. After all, we were supposed to keep a record of everything we did for a certain number of years in case they needed to be referenced again for some reason in the future. But that scenario was only slightly probable, and surely if someone did need to access them, they wouldn't need access to absolutely everything. All the more frustratingly, it was actually pretty redundant that I even had to aggregate this information into a spreadsheet at all, since we also kept an electronic copy of everything in a software program. All the spreadsheet actually did was make it slightly easier to be found later, if it ever needed to be found at all. So as far as I was concerned, there really was no reason for me to be doing anything I did, or at least not one that I would ever see with my own two eyes. And so I felt completely alienated from myself, alienated from everything I did, something that robbed me of a sense that I was participating in something truly meaningful. And it felt so stupid, because I knew there were countless people out there who were feeling just like I once did, and would give anything to be in my position, not to mention my own past self. It's not like I was rich or anything, but my life was stable and comfortable, and I was incredibly grateful for it. But eventually, I couldn't ignore this nearly imperceptible emptiness that I still felt unlike any I had ever experienced before. Because this one couldn't be explained away by poverty, an unending sense of loneliness, or cockroach roommates. Because even after achieving all that I had, this feeling began to creep up on me during the moments when I wasn't focusing on work, fantasizing about or buying my newest hyperfixation, checking off some task from my to-do list, or being with my friends. In those quiet moments to myself, in the privacy of my home, the veil between worlds would grow very thin, and suddenly there was nothing I could do to shake an overwhelming sense of sorrow if I thought, this is all there is. It can't be. And it was because of this feeling that something in Jung's words deeply resonated with me, and why I haven't stopped thinking about them since. Because I, like you, have watched the world become what it has, as the world watches itself unfold into this history-defining decade, for better or worse. And perhaps also like you, many of the events that I've experienced and continue to experience as an individual or through the eyes of others via the news and social media continues to grate more and more on my humanity, and so I've grown increasingly weary of the world. And perhaps also like you, I am in a constant battle with the part of me who still has faith that in my lifetime I can leave this place better than how I entered it, and the other that's trapped in a state of learned helplessness because of a complete loss of meaning for existence itself amidst the world's chaos. And that is why I believe that we need the soul. But I don't mean that one must somehow earn it. If you've watched this far, then perhaps like me, you also believe that each of us already possesses a soul, or something otherworldly that traces us back to something beyond ourselves, no matter how you personally define that something. So no, I don't mean that we need the soul as in we have to earn it. I mean that we need the soul as in we need to encounter it. We need to be in relationship to it, to that part of ourselves that remembers who we truly are beyond mere personality, beyond time and space, beyond all circumstances. It's not that any of that doesn't matter. It does. But what if exactly who you are in this moment and who you are becoming has a purpose, one that, as Heraclitus said, you will spend the rest of your life discovering to a depth beyond report. To explain what I mean, let's take it to a place of Plato. I'm sure you've heard of the Myth of Er, but if not, you're probably at least familiar with the story. It goes something like this. Er is slain and enters into the afterlife, where he encounters a panel of judges seated between two doors, one leading into the heavens above and the other to the earth down below. Souls enter and exit from either direction to face judgment for their deeds, and where it will be decided whether they will enter or re-enter earth or heaven for another several years. After approaches the judges, he's told that he's been chosen as a messenger for the gods, so that after he returns to earth, he can tell man about everything he will soon witness in this world. Then begins to overhear a conversation between different souls as they recount to one another all they've just experienced from where they had just come. Those coming from heaven describe with elation 1,000 years of unbelievable beauty, while those returning from below lament their last 1,000 years spent in toil and suffering. Then, embarks with the souls who have just been through judgment on a days-long hike across a field. As they walk, they eventually reach a marvelous rainbow of light, extending through the whole of heaven and earth, and continue hiking until they are amidst it. Within it, they encounter with their own eyes the belt of heaven, which is comprised of two chains extending from heaven down to earth that holds together the entire circle of the universe. Between these two ends rests the spindle of necessity, on which the revolution of the whole thread turns in one unified motion through its large whirl. Housed within this larger whirl are seven smaller ones, so that the 7 smaller threads also turn slowly against the singular motion in the opposite direction, though they ultimately remain subject to the motion of the outermost whirl. Together, all 8 revolutions turn on the knees of necessity, so that their vibrations create the hum of a singular note. And seated at the spindle are the daughters of necessity, the 3 fates, who hum along with it. Clothos sings of the present, occasionally assisting with her right hand the revolution of the outermost circle, while Atropos sings of the future and uses her left hand to guide the innermost ones. Lachesis sings of the past, and in one moment she guides the outermost circle with her right hand, and in another she spins the innermost circle with her left. As the souls draw near to the spindle, a prophet then appears before them, and they watch him take from the knees of Lachesis an assortment of lots, as well as many samples of lives. These are the lives from which the souls must choose a new cycle of life and mortality. But first, the prophet instructs them to choose their genius, or daemon, or spirit guardian, after which they will be given a random lot to determine who will choose first. Throwing the lot to the ground, they scatter and spin at random before finally falling near the feet of each soul. And as each reads the number landing nearest them, the prophet proclaims, "And let him who chooses the first lot have the first choice, and the life which he chooses shall be his destiny. Virtue is free, and as a man honors or dishonors her, he will have more or less of her. The responsibility is with the chooser. God is justified." Then, in order of the lots each soul had drawn, they choose from the samples of lives of every man and every animal of every condition. Of the lives of man, some are shaped by tyranny, some poverty, while others by fame and fortune, and still others by quiet humility, and all else in between. Some are exalted for the beauty, their strength, or the greatness of their ancestors. Likewise, others are left destitute for possessing the opposite qualities. But of these lives, no definite character or personality is given, since by necessity, each soul must become a different person in their new life. But excluding this, the framework of condition is given so that each life is characterized by some mix of every quality of health and disease, wealth and poverty, noble and humble birth, beauty and ugliness, strength and weakness, private and public station, cleverness or dullness, and mean states. And in choosing their new life, the soul must consider all of these possible combinations to determine which will make their soul more just or unjust, and choose according to their will to virtue. The first soul examines the samples, and is at once seduced by the promise of one particular life of tyrannical power, causing him to overlook the fate which binds him to one day devour his very own children. Still, a few others choose their life within similarly hypnotized states, or without much contemplation, especially those who have just come from heaven and have yet to be schooled by trial. But those who have just come from earth still keep their painful memories close, and so make no hurry to choose. Once all the souls have chosen, they approach Lachesis, who sends them on their way with the genius they had chosen to be the guardian of their lives, though not in the sense that the genius is the guarantor of a prolonged life. Rather, the genius's duty is to be the keeper of the life which the soul has chosen once they are made to forget themselves after they are born on earth. As an otherworldly being, the genius will remain on earth alongside the soul, and like each of the fates guides the spindle of necessity, the genius remembers the life of the soul and guides them in fulfilling it, whatever that should take. So soul and genius, now walking as a pair, approach Clothos, who draws each life into the revolution, setting each of their fates in motion. And after each life has been fastened, Clothos brings them finally to Atropos, to spin the thread so that the fate of each life becomes unturnable, now joined to eternity, which binds together the whole of the universe in the direction of the greatest revolution. And with their destinies sealed, the souls pass beneath the throne of necessity, into the barren inferno that is the plain of forgetfulness. And after trudging through its oppressive heat, they are relieved to finally reach the river of unmindfulness, and it is here that they finally set up camp for the night. Once settled, every soul drinks from the river and begins to forget, some being wiser to drink only what is asked of them, while those of lesser constitution drink with fervor, as if to savor its sweetness for as long as possible, before it falls into a dim whisper of eternity that their tongue will have soon forgotten. And soon after each soul had drifted into a deep slumber, a furious thunderstorm begins to crackle across the night sky, just as a great earthquake rumbles the ground where they had barely begun to sleep. And without warning, every soul is thrust in every direction across the heavens, passing each of the 7 celestial spheres, and lastly through the gate of mankind before they are plummeted to the earth to be born. But himself could not say exactly where each of these souls had gone, for in the midst of the commotion, he suddenly found himself laying on the pyre where his body had been laid to rest. And as he opened his eyes, the words of the judges reverberated in his bones like a death knell, and he recognized this moment as his duty to tell all who would listen about the message of eternity. What I find so fascinating about this story is the idea that everything about who we are now, our appearance, the time period in which we live, the family and material circumstances we were born into, our talents and weaknesses, our personality and character, all of these things, whether we consider them good or ill, were chosen by ourselves for a specific purpose, down to the very last detail of who we are and what we are becoming. There is a reason for us being. But of course, we don't remember it. After all, we're only a person living in the unfolding of time, something which the medieval Christian philosopher Boethius writes, does not gain what is tomorrow's, but has already lost what is yesterday's. And yet, the soul itself is eternal, something which is already unfolded in the ever-present moment, already known, is already. Then can it be that somehow something in us does remember? Think back to a time when you had to make a decision about something that, with hindsight, you now understand as being a consequential turning point in your life. Have you ever had to make a choice in which something spontaneous within you emerged and inexplicably pulled you towards the path which you ultimately took, but which you at that time could not articulate why it drew you? Have you ever chosen something over and above something else that was perhaps more expected of you, something deemed more pragmatic or realistic, against your better judgment, because of a sense that something had been stirred inside you that your heart could not ignore? Although we cannot know why we were born into this particular body, at this particular time in history, to this particular family, within these particular material and psychological circumstances, and although we may not understand our purpose for being on this earth, the soul remembers. That's why we need the soul. So turning back to Jung, we may begin to answer the question, what is the symbolic life, and why is it important for the soul? In his own words, Jung loosely answers this question in his book, Man in Search of a Soul, writing, "The human psyche, from time immemorial, has been shot through with religious feelings and ideas." As I mentioned, when Jung first names the symbolic life, he is, of course, speaking at a conference for the Guild of Pastoral Psychology, which, according to its website, was established to encourage psychological study among clergy members as well as other spiritual leaders, though as of now, its membership is open to anyone of any background. So naturally, Jung's lecture regarded psychology through a spiritual and religious lens. And if you're familiar with any of Jung's works, you'll know that this is par for the course. As Smith describes it, psychology for Jung represented a middle ground between matter and spirit. That is, between the domain of life primarily addressed by science and that addressed by religion. As a mentee under Freud, Jung also studied dreams, yet he ultimately diverged from Freud after discovering something remarkable. From his own client practice, he recognized a striking resemblance between the dream images of many of his clients and the images in what Smith describes as the collective symbol systems of the world's religions. According to Jung, these symbols not only act as vehicles for expressing general human truths, but can also tell us something about the nature of our individual existence. Put more simply, religious symbols not only tell us about personal concerns, but also illuminate something about our participation in the universal experience of being human. As Smith describes, Jung rejected any approach that sought to reduce the religious expressions of the psyche to something more rational or presumably enlightened. To do so, he felt was to devalue the natural mode of the psyche's expression. In other words, the religious is not an accidental quality of psychic life, nor is it a distortion of some other underlying and more rational dynamic. Religious feelings and ideas, rather, are one of the primary forms through which the psyche expresses itself. Viewed in this light, the symbols and images of the world's religions reveal the nature of the human psyche, even as they function to mediate the experience of transcendence to it. They are, so to speak, the language of the psyche. Regarding Jung's mentorship beneath Freud in the study of the unconscious and dreams, Smith further writes, put simply, where Freud's attention was on the activity of one's personal dynamics as reflected in the images of dreams, Jung's attention went to the transpersonal depths converted by the very same material. As the word transpersonal suggests, Jung casts his vision to that which was beyond the merely personal history of the individual. For Jung, the meaning of a human life could not be exhausted exclusively by reference to one's biography, such as the details of family history or the accumulation of life events. Underlying the busy hum of the personal life were the steady reverberations of the archetypal experience of human life. The vital question was not just, who am I in relation to my family and my past experience, but also, who am I in relation to life in the world and to the experience of the infinite? And no matter when or where we look throughout space and time, we will find overtones of this uniquely human fascination with the infinite. There are gods all around us, and since it is the religious dimension where Jung believed the psyche expresses itself, then it must be that through the symbols in which it expresses itself, that the very nature of the psyche can be gleaned. Though religion expresses the transpersonal, or that which is beyond the personal, for Jung, it's actually the transpersonal which tells us more about the individual experience, despite our perceived differences. Since as human beings, we all share in the countless archetypal dramas, which are in their essence universal to the human condition. This is the core of the collective unconscious, the deepest part of the unconscious mind, which is inherited from our ancestors, containing the instinctive patterns, images, and memories that have instructed humanity since time immemorial. In a sense, the collective unconscious is the energetic container that holds the entirety of human experience. In his book, The Power of Myth, journalist and author Bill Moyers records his many conversations with writer and professor of mythology Joseph Campbell. In describing why he finds himself so drawn to myth, Moyers writes, "These myths speak to me because they express what I know inside is true. Why is this so? Does that come from the ground of my being, the unconscious that I have inherited from all that has come before me?" To which Campbell responds, "Living a human life in New York City or living a human life in the caves, you go through the same stages of childhood, coming to sexual maturity, transformation of the dependency of childhood into the responsibility of manhood or womanhood, marriage, then failure of the body, gradual loss of powers, and death. You have the same body, the same bodily experiences, and so you respond to the same images." Like Campbell seems to suggest, Jung also believed there is both a rational and non-rational dimension to cognition. When we think of cognitive processes, we often think of thinking itself. But that's only one part of the story. Those non-rational cognitive processes that I've been alluding to are not so much a result of one's own will. but rather happen to the individual from outside their own conscious will. Remember earlier, when I asked whether you had ever made a decision about something, the reasoning for which you could not articulate, or which you could find no correlation for making in that moment? Or if you had ever undertaken an action that seemingly led to something pivotal in your life, though you could not understand why you did so, thus leading you to question whether it was even your decision? That is the non-rational, a spontaneous idea, a gut feeling, a momentary voice that intercepts your inner feed of dialogue, as if someone had briefly turned the dial to the wrong channel. The voice may sound like, but doesn't feel like your own. The non-rational is where intuition resides, something which Smith explains is imperceptible until it spontaneously emerges into our conscious awareness. It decides whether or not to emerge, not us, for it is the very quality of an intuition that it is not a thought emerging by our own conscious will. As Smith puts it, we are not the initiator, but the receiver, where the initiative of intuition is not the will, but something unknown to us. Or as he puts it, the individual is not actor, but acted upon. To be sure, these ideas are bound to come across as a bit melodramatic to us, since it is the rational part of the psyche where we're most comfortable existing. Further, it's quite natural for us to want to deny any notion that we're not completely free agents, let alone that we may be acted upon by seemingly eerie and ambiguous forces. Perhaps, you might think, Jung was just a little paranoid, or like his predecessor Freud, dabbled a little bit too much in psychoactive drugs. But if you've ever gazed longingly at the sunset, if you've ever felt your heart quiver from the arresting profundity of a string of words, if you've ever stepped into a cathedral, a library, a train station, or any historic building that still retains a sense of reverence and artistry, and been confounded by a sense that you are being touched by something ineffable, if you've ever become possessed by a sense of awe and terror and wonder all at once, because of that which cannot be contained by words, that means you are human. And by virtue of your humanity, the capacity to experience that which is divinely non-rational is already within you. We're all born with an innate ability to think symbolically. And I'd like to clarify thinking in this context, because what Jung seemed to mean by what he referred to as thinking symbolically was not that the symbolic life is something to be understood intellectually, nor is it the possession of some piece of knowledge put towards some end. Rather, to live a symbolic life is to abandon a passivity towards existence and begin to participate in the terrifying wonder that it is to experience life. Not simply to be swept up by it, but to encounter it as the great living mystery that it is, and whose end we will eventually come to realize can only be known as something ultimately unknowable. To borrow Smith's words once more, the symbolic life does not provide an answer to the questions about life, but rather is itself a question posed to life. Symbols, then, are both the language of the psyche and the portals for experiencing that which is ineffable. And when we open ourselves to symbols, not simply as concepts, but allow ourselves to be immersed in their content, we may come to know and become known to the soul, whose song reverberates within and through the images of religion and a myth. If we take all that's been said for granted, then it's truly remarkable to be a person on this earth. But for the sake of not making human beings so self-important, and despite my belief in everything I've just said, the truth is that maybe none of this matters. Someday, billions of years from now, our sun is going to burn out, and the entire story of humanity will burst up into the stratosphere, into nothingness, darkness, metacosmia. The truth is, we can't ever know if anything is out there. The truth is, no matter what we believe, what we feel, what we think we know to be true in our hearts, we could be wrong. Perhaps this world isn't governed by anything. No fates, no providence, just random chaos. Perhaps we never chose this life, and there's no higher design unfolding of which we are in creative service to, or it to us. Perhaps, when the sun does finally give out, there will remain no single trace of any of this, not even as a memory in the mind of a divine intelligence. All that can be said about any god or gods is that of them, we know nothing. But we're here now. You're here now. Think about that for a moment. It's nothing trivial. And one day, it will all be nothing. I don't know what that means for anything. And it certainly begs the question of what all of it has even been for, or what it is for now. Still, so much had to happen for us to even be here, at this very moment, where I am speaking these very words for you to hear. Things that I understand, things that I don't. Things that none of us do or ever will. Yet, that life as we know it will be gone by some tomorrow is nothing to eternity. To it, we are a flash in the pan. But that's the magic of it all. We get to experience the unfoldment of time. For this brief moment, time as the moving picture of eternity, so in love with the image of itself that it blooms on and on into infinity, so that all of us may brush against our short but momentous encounter with existence. Symbols affirm that we are it. We are eternal because we share in its essence through a soul. And in experiencing this, one rises above this fear, this apathy, this nihilism, this sense of oneself as a mere nothing but, and life only a feeble illusion that in the end will cease to be. In the words of Campbell, all of life is a meditation, most of it unintentional. And as such, the symbolic life is not just a question posed to life, but a call to rise to the occasion of life. And if you're wondering about the rest of my story, I did eventually give up what I had built to finally return to school last year. And despite re-experiencing a few of the struggles I described, I couldn't be happier, because it's a sacrifice I lovingly chose in virtue of meaning. Because human beings need meaning. We need that life affirm itself. We need life to be the mirror which reflects our purpose for being here. Or at least, that's how I feel. And I'll admit that the goals of this channel are a challenge, because as Jung writes, the symbolic life cannot simply be intellectualized, but it also must be lived. However, he also writes that if symbols are a kind of language, then perhaps translating it into a language that the psyche is already familiar with, that is, literalism and concepts, then that may be the best place to start. How this channel will, or even can, transcend mere intellectualism, I'm not sure. But even if whatever I do acts as a springboard for thought into experience, I will have done exactly what I set out to do. For now, I only hope to have begun a conversation, as there's so much more to be said about this topic. And like Smith writes, it's my hope that we don't get lost in all that there is to say about this mystery, so that we may learn to listen to what the mystery has to say about itself. Because if we can allow ourselves to take a pause from living our lives as actor and surrender ourselves to be acted upon, to be possessed by life, to be its victim, all that's left to experience is awe. And if you feel it too, or hope that one day you will, I invite you to join me. So to finally close this discussion for the time being, I want to return to the book I already mentioned by the journalist Bill Moyers, who found himself drawn to Campbell for his work in mythology, and perhaps unconsciously for the close friendship that was to blossom between the two. The entire book is formatted like a conversation between two friends, because that's exactly what it was. And each chapter opens with a quote from Campbell. The book opens with something Campbell said that I believe not only captures the spirit of this video, but the ethos for this channel, and exactly what I hope it unfolds into being. People say what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think that what we're really seeking is an experience of being alive, so that our life experiences on the purely physical plane will have resonances within our innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive.